back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. You got Big Baby Stef. You got Alex Lott, the fantasy phenom, with me today. And look, we've already hit the ground running. We've said it time and time again. It's redraft season. It's mock draft season. Drafts have already happened. Drafts are happening now. Camp is in full swing. Preseason games have happened. We've seen guys get on the field. We're seeing names like Isaiah Pacheco get skyrocket up these draft boards. We'll talk about it all here in a moment. But, Alex, we're back at it again with a 1 QB, 1 flex, 12-team PPR redraft mock. You ready to get into this thing?
Yeah, I'm excited. And I know a lot of people have been asking for sleeper videos and values and busts. And honestly, these mock draft videos are a great time to, one, learn about strategy, learn about ADPs, learn about which guys we like and what ranges. But two, we hit on so many sleepers and values and busts and breakouts as we talk about players in these mock drafts. So if you're watching these are the best prep you can do, both hearing breakdowns of these players from other people and then also doing mock drafts yourself. So I'm excited to get into it. And we will have those videos coming as we get closer and closer to the season. I know these next couple weekends, like the next 3 weekends, will be the biggest draft weekends of the entire season. So it is time. We're into preseason action. News is breaking every single day. But Steph, let's hop in.
So we're pivoting from our last video where we used Fantasy Pros. This time we're going to try full-time fantasies mock draft world championships. Okay, they set up these mock drafts based on ADP from high-stakes fantasy leagues. Now, there's still a little bit of randomization. We did a test earlier. We saw Najee Harris go at the 102. So not perfect by any means, but much better than what we saw from Fantasy Pros the last time we did a mock. I'm hoping that this is a lot more similar to what you guys are going to see in your actual real-life drafts, whether it's your home leagues or your high-stakes leagues. But let's share the screen and jump into it. So to start off this draft, we get Jonathan Taylor at the 101, Justin Jefferson 102. I think you'll see that in a decent amount of leagues. Usually McCaffrey will go in that top 3. We did see Najee and Derrick Henry get pushed up the board, but I did see Derrick Henry go at the 103 in a recent real-life home league draft that I did last weekend. So I think that's actually pretty reasonable there for Derrick Henry. Christian McCaffrey goes, Cooper Kupp goes, Jamar Chase goes, Austin Eckler goes, and unfortunately, Alex, we got sniped by who I would have loved to take at this spot at the 110 with Stephon Diggs going at the 109. And now the whole big 4 tier of receivers are off the board. And there's really 2 names that I'm looking at this point. It's Dalvin Cook. We talked about him a ton. I scooped him up in our last mock. It's because he's a lock for 250 carries and 50 targets with a lot more than that if this Rams offense really does come to fruition with Sean O'Connor coming over to the Vikings. Devonta Adams is there. Kelsey's there. But Cook is the pick for me. Alex, I know you're an RB aficionado like I am. Is that the pick for us here in an easy 110 slot?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy. And one thing I want to say, I don't know if you mentioned this earlier or not, but this is the first time I think we've both drafted one team together. Normally we both draft our own teams and we argue about whose team is better and this and that. So we're going to have to make some compromises here to put our best foot forward and get the best team possible. But luckily we do agree on this pick. I love going running back early because I've just found in all these leagues, 12 and 14 team especially, those receivers in rounds 4, 5, 6 is just a value sweet spot. And I love having my running backs early. I normally don't like to leave round 3 without at least 2 running backs. And Dalvin Cook here allows us to do just that and start that strategy at the 110.
And there's a lot of different strategies out there. But what you and I have learned over the years is robust RB is typically the play. We did see you go with a 0 RB play last time we did a mock draft. So it's still, hey, let the draft come to you. You got to be watered. Don't go in with a set strategy in mind. I would have loved to take Stephon Diggs here, like I mentioned, and then we would have gone wide receiver in the first round and probably smashed an RB round 2, round 3, maybe even round 4 if we end up going with a receiver that falls again. But let's go Dalvin Cook and see what happens. So after we took Dalvin, we saw Mixon go, DeAndre Swift go, Devonta Adams unfortunately got picked, as did CeeDee Lamb. So now we're in another interesting spot. And based on high-stake league ADP, Aaron Jones, Mike Evans, and Travis Kelsey are the next names up. No QBs in consideration here yet. Alex, where are you leaning on this? Because I think I'm leaning Kelsey.
This one's tough, and Kelsey normally goes in that late first round. The receivers to me are off the board at this point. I think that big four tier is pretty solid. And then honestly, Adams and Lamb are the two that I'm willing to take around the turn. So if I look at the running back spot, I think both Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley are appealing. I am higher than consensus on Aaron Jones, and I'm more than happy to spend an early second round pick on him. And I love the tight end values late, but it is interesting to see Kelsey here. And part of the reason we do these is to see how roster constructions can break down if you go early tight end. Haven't done a ton of early tight end so far this redraft season. So I'm perfectly fine to bypass the running back, see if we can get a Javonte Williams, a Zeke, or even a Breece Hall or someone like that to get back to us in the back of the third. And let's roll the dice here and go with Travis Kelsey and see how this roster ends up and just try to get that weekly advantage at the tight end spot.
I love it. And Kelsey is in a great position this year because the Chiefs essentially did this rebuild on the fly at the wide receiver position, letting Tyreek go, get paid by Miami, bringing in Juju Smith-Schuster, drafting Sky Moore, Marcus Valdes-Scantling was brought in. There's this ambiguity right now of who is going to be that number one receiver for the Chiefs. But we know Kelsey is going to be that tried and true number one option for Mahomes. They've had the chemistry. We've seen Kelsey do it time and time again. I know Mark Andrews had the big blow-up season last year, but Kelsey's a name that we're going to go back to again and pretty much forget about tight end for the rest of this draft. You and I are very, very vehemently against drafting either multiple quarterbacks or multiple tight ends if you go with one of those early. The reason for that is because there's so many running backs that end up jumping into peak positions that you can get in that 12, 13, 14, 15, 16th round of your drafts. That's how you find guys like James Robinson. That's how you find value on names like Myles Gaskin, Chase Edmonds. There's some names this year that we're going to get into as we get deeper into this draft, but you want to hit those running backs late. You don't need a second quarterback. If you have Jalen Hurts and Kirk Cousins, you're never going to start Kirk Cousins in your lineup. For the one bye week that Hurts is going to have, you can stream somebody off waivers in these 12-team PPR redraft leagues. The waiver wire is shallow enough that you can find value at quarterback. You can go for the touchdown or bust tight end options like a Mike Gesicki, like a Irv Smith. I'm sure names like David Njoku, Robert Tonyan, Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett, Austin Hooper are all going to be names that you're going to be fine with in the right matchup, picking for $0 off waivers, plugging them in for that 1 week during that bye week. So don't waste valuable draft spots on positions that you're really never going to use because you have that one set it and forget it name. So we'll go Kelsey and forget about tight end for the rest of the draft here. Still no quarterbacks off the board. We saw a tier of receiver that I really, really love that unfortunately we're not going to get our hands on. T. Higgins went, Mike Evans went, Keenan Allen went, Deebo Samuel off the board, Tyreek Hill, Michael Pittman, A.J. Brown, and Mike Williams all went. Feels like we got sniped there on the receiver values. But at running back, there's actually some decent names still on the board. We saw Fournette, Kamara, Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Saquon Barkley go in the second round. In the third, we had Nick Chubb. Travis Etienne unfortunately gets picked before us. Montgomery got picked. And then Cam Akers sniped us again. I would have loved to have a debate with you on Cam Akers because everyone knows I'm leading that Akers hype train right now. But to me, there is a clear value at running back. Talking about the robust RB strategy, and that's Breece Hall. What's your thought on Breece here in the back of the third?
It's interesting because it's like they're listening to me on this full-time fantasy app because at the end of last round or before the Kelsey pick, I said maybe a James Conner, a Zeke, or a Breece get back to us. Someone checked the tapes, but those are the three names I threw out, and those are the three names at running back that I'm looking at here. You know, James Conner I think is interesting, but in most of these leagues, I've just found myself leaning Zeke or Breece if James Conner is on the board. I just prefer the other guys for a variety of reasons. I think James Conner could have upside, but I just have question marks about his ability to hold up in that offense, about how sustainable what he did last season is. And I just think the workload for Zeke gives him a very high floor in Dallas. And I think the upside for Breece is tremendous. So really with this pick, to me, it's between Zeke and Breece. I'm fine to just take our wide receiver one on the turn. There's several names there I like. And it just comes down to what do we want with this pick? Do we want stability in that RB2 spot? Or do we want upside? And I actually lean Zeke with this pick. I think with Kelsey and Dalvin Cook, we have plenty of upside on our roster. And Zeke, to me, from week 1 through the balance of the season, barring injury, should be a rock solid play at the running back position. He should get a ton of work this year. I'm not scared about Tony Pollard. Zeke was hurt for a big part of last year, which hurt his efficiency. So I think he should get 250 plus carries this season with the departure of Amari Cooper, with James Washington hurt, with Michael Gallup hurt. We could see Zeke utilized more in the passing game as well. We often see when there's vacated targets in an offense, a lot of those targets go to the running back position. Tony Pollard and Zeke should benefit from that. So with Breece, I get it. He could ramp up really quickly. Love him as a prospect. Absolutely love him in Dynasty. But when we're looking at a redraft league, I wonder, does Breece take a while to get ramped up? And then the first several weeks of the season, we start out, 3-3 or something like that. What happens in this Jets offense? What's Zach Wilson's deal with the injury? Mekhi Becton is now out for the season, and there's questions now on the offensive line. Michael Carter's still there. So to me, the pick is Zeke. If it was between Breece and James Conner and Zeke was off the board, I'd be perfectly happy with Breece here. But that's why I lean with Ezekiel Elliott. But
I'm fine with the Zeke takes, honestly. Okay. And what's sneaky about Zeke is his target volume. He has consistently gotten a 10% plus target share. And he's coming off 2 seasons prior to 2021 where he had over a 12% target share. If you think back to 2018, he had that 20% target share, absolutely ridiculous, over 90 targets for Ezekiel Elliott. He does get used in the passing game. Everyone's excited about Pollard. We love Pollard. He's an upside play, but at the end of the day, he is a backup. They have Zeke on the monster contract. They're going to run him into the ground. For better or for worse, we saw him play last year on the sprained MCL. Or PCL, can't remember what it was, but we saw him play through the injury, and it did hurt his efficiency. But we're not drafting Zeke here for efficiency. We're drafting him for volume in a high-powered offense that we expect to score a lot of points, to operate with a high pace of play, and to essentially be a safe, consistent option for 230-plus carries, and I think 60-plus targets. Now, that might be a little bit spicy. Maybe 50 targets is a more conservative projection if we expect Pollard to take a step up and for Zeke to take a step back. But he hasn't seen less than 60 targets ever since he entered the NFL, or it has been on pace. I know he had that suspension year. So I'm with you on Zeke here. Not necessarily the sexy upside name, but a safe play. And I think where his upside could come into play, same as James Conner, is where he could see 20 touchdowns if Dallas gets hot. And I remember Zeke was on pace for that last year at times. And man, we're getting sniped on wide receiver again.
Those are the 3 guys I wanted. That's a bummer.
Same. I was circling Cortland Sutton for our wide receiver 1. Looks like it's not going to happen. So do we go with Breece Hall and punt the receiver position? That is the tough spot that we're in. And this is where we feel the pain of taking Travis Kelsey at that 203 spot. We'll see how our roster turns out at the end. But so far, we're almost trapped into taking wide receiver, because if we don't take one now and we see another receiver run happen,
it's going to be painful.
We're going to be looking at Darnell Mooney, Jerry Jeudy, Michael Thomas as our wide receiver 1, and none of those feel like safe options. Alex, where do you lean here? Do we go with a Brandon Cooks safe, stable play? Do we go with an Allen Robinson and just pray that he could be the number 2 in a high-powered Rams offense? And Cobb takes a step back. This is
interesting, and this is a challenge, because the truth is, in just about every 12-team mock draft I've done on Fantasy Pros, on Sleeper, even a lot of underdog drafts, you consistently see, maybe not underdog because those players are a little bit more informed, and Sutton and Williams are going in that 3rd, 4th round. But on Fantasy Pro Sleeper, a lot of these ADPs, ESPN, Cortland Sutton and Mike Williams are those names in round 4 and round 5, and sometimes even round 6 that you can just scoop up. And certainly guys like Brandon Cooks and Allen Robinson are there. So I love that tier. But here with these sharper players, more serious players, and these ADPs coming from those players, we see those names going earlier. So it has made things a little bit challenging, and we are at a crossroads. And in a vacuum, I would much rather have Breece Hall on my roster than Terry McLaurin, Jalen Waddle, or Brandon Cooks. If you get to week 4 and you try to send Terry McLaurin for Breece Hall or Brandon Cooks for Breece Hall, they're going to laugh in your face if barring something unforeseen happening in the first couple weeks of the season. So I tend to say, hey, we went with the safe running back play in Zeke. Let's go for Breece Hall here, get the upside play at running back as well. Let's see what happens at wide receiver. And we might not pick another running back until double-digit rounds at this point. And we'll take these upside shots at receivers through the middle rounds and see what happens. That's what I would love to do with this roster. But Steph, I did kind of sway Zeke in the last pick, so I'm going to let you make the final call on this one.
Oh man, this is brutal. This is absolutely brutal because where we're at, there's are a couple bona fide number one receivers, but they're in the worst situations you can imagine. Brandon Cooks with the Davis
DK
Mill,
Metcalf,
Houston, DK, tanking Seattle team, or we're taking a number two on a high-powered offense like an Allen Robinson, like a Hollywood Brown. I almost want to just take the gamble and see what happens. I would not do this in a real draft. I would go Brandon Cooks, but I'm so intrigued now to see what happens at the receiver spot. Should we stick to this robust RB game plan? We have Kelsey at the set it and forget it, tight end advantage every single week. Let's just see if we can get like an Allen Robinson, maybe an Amari Cooper, Michael Thomas as our wide receiver one. If we're looking at like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Godwin, I'm going to be upset.
Double move sports, experimentation in these mock drafts. That is why we're here. So you don't have to do this in your draft. Let's see what happens.
Hopefully it at least makes for good content. And okay. We did see a lot of those receivers go, but
there's
we saw
one name that saved us.
There's one name that saved us. Is it Michael Thomas?
Actually, there's two names I think that saved us if we can get both of them. I actually love Mike. I think Michael Thomas is interesting. I know people are going to laugh in our face on that one, but it's the chance at a guy who could be a top 20 receiver with volume. And I think Jerry Jeudy is interesting as well. I think Sutton is the receiver that profiles as the true alpha in Denver, but there is a non-zero chance that Jerry Jeudy is the production leader from a fantasy standpoint in Denver. We wanted Sutton last round. We could go with Jerry Jeudy this round, knowing he'll be in those two receiver sets now that Tim Patrick is out for the season. So I think Jerry Jeudy is interesting as well. If it was me, I would go Jeudy and hope Thomas gets to us on the turn because he could be the number one in Denver. And I think he has the upside as well with Russell Wilson there. And you and I are both all in on the Denver offense this year, so I do want pieces from the Broncos. But there's a lot of risk involved with Jeudy because he hasn't shown us a consistent full season of production yet in his NFL career. Now he's heading into season number 3.
He had the high ankle sprain last year that pretty much chalked his whole season. And then as a rookie, he had a lot of hype coming out of Alabama, but it was Drew Lock under center. He was commanding air yards left and right, but the catch rate was brutal. The efficiency was brutal. But I'm with you from a standpoint of I want to invest in the Denver passing game with Russell Wilson, controlling the tempo, getting the keys to the kingdom from Hackett and from the Denver front office. Had we gone Keenan Allen or T. Higgins, or if CD or Adams had fallen to us at that 203, I would love to play with the Mahomes pick here, but that would have negated the Kelsey stack. So that's part of the reason Mahomes is interesting is because we have Kelsey, but because we went with this 0 wide receiver build, we got to go with Jeudy here, even though we're kind of gritting our teeth. I'm okay with a couple other receiver names, and this is where we usually like to find our value, but unfortunately, we get sniped again.
Juju and Michael Thomas were the two I would love to have.
So get absolutely sniped, but Alex, more experimentation. Do we do it? Do we go with the Kelsey Mahomes Chiefs stack? All we want to do is win a league. We need to beat 11 other players. You're typically, unless you're in like a super deep, like 14-team league, or you're doing like high point payouts, which just helps our case even more here, you're typically only getting your ROI if you win a league. Maybe you get your money back if you make the championship game and you finish second. What we care about is winning. Do we put our money where our mouth is now and go Mahomes for that peak upside? Because there's really no one that I'm in love with that receiver. It's like, what's the difference between Christian Kirk and Devonta Smith and Treylon Burks and Kadarius Toney? Like, these are all upside gambles. You know, I'm big on Lazard. We could circle back with him. We should just accept, in my opinion, at this point, that wide receiver is just going to be a weak point for us. Maybe we try to address it if somebody starts slow out the season. We try to buy low on somebody. Now, that's us putting faith in ourselves to go and execute a trade. It's up to every fantasy gamer to decide for themselves, am I in a league where trades happen? Can I move that value later on? Could we sell Breece Hall after a couple of good games and go get a Keenan Allen if Mike Williams looks like he's the guy? Can we go get an A.J. Brown and a Ramondre Stevenson combo for a Zeke if he comes out hot? So,
Yeah.
Alex, are you with me on taking this Mahomes gamble? I know this roster is turning into something like I've never done this before. I've never seen this.
Me neither. I typically have a rule where if I go, I'm never going to go early quarterback, but if I go early tight end to Kelsey or Andrews, I punt quarterback completely to help value at other positions.
Me too.
But I don't focus on this in my draft, but I think this presents a unique opportunity looking at the board. Several other high-tier quarterbacks, Lamar, Kyler, Hurts, even you could throw maybe Burrow and Brady into that tier. They usually do go later in most drafts that I do. But this is like those guys aren't going to make it back to us. So we have the chance to kick off a quarterback run. And normally you want to be at the start of those runs because when you think about ADPs, if we take Mahomes, we're not looking at quarterback for the rest of the draft. And hopefully 3-4 of these additional picks as it wraps back around to us are going to be quarterbacks, which preserves some of the receiver value. So I think we can go Mahomes here and still get someone in that tier of a Christian Kirk, a Devontae Smith, even an Allen Lazard or a Robert Woods, take a couple of those guys at the next turn and see what we can do there. So let's do it. Let's roll the dice.
Ooh. Man, this is it doesn't feel good.
I don't know if we advise this, but we're going to try. And only one more quarterback went off the board. That's crazy.
Now, maybe that's just a function of, hey, these are bots drafting.
Yeah.
They're not thinking about runs.
I think in most leagues we would see a lot of these QBs gone by round 7.
I think so as well. And, we're playing in this mock scenario against fantasy football world championship ADPs, high-end drafters that know what they're doing, right? It's like it's way harder to get values. Yeah. But I will say Mahomes in the 6th is pretty good value from what you see on underdog formats and your typical home leagues. He's going to go third, fourth round in a lot of those scenarios right after Justin Herbert. So to get him around and then some past Herbert, I think is fine value for what you're typically going to see in a draft. But we're essentially committed at this point to smash wide receiver for like the next 5 picks. Who are you going with out of this kind of gross tier of Ayuk, Lockett, Lazard, Woods, Burks, Claypool, and then even lower down the board, we have some other interesting names like Sky Moore. You and I are big Olave boys. I'll tell you right now, Olave will probably go sooner rather than later. So he's one that if we don't get him on this pick, we circle back. But Alex, do you like Ayuk with Trey Lance at San Francisco? The pass volume might be a little bit sus, but Ayuk has shown good rapport, at least as far as reports coming out of camp. When Lance did get that start, he was making big throws to the outside, and Ayuk was taking those to the house. Do we bank on Lance continuing that, or do we bank on Lazard showing up to be that wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, like you and I have said he will be on other episodes?
Here's how I think about these 2 picks, both going to be wide receivers. I think I want one guy that is more of this volatile, boom-bust, high upside, low floor. And I want one guy that might just be a steady wide receiver too, so that we don't have absolutely terrible downside on our roster. So I see names like Robert Woods, Jacoby Myers. This is a full PPR league, even like a Tyler Boyd. Like those are guys that are solid plays week to week in PPR formats with a ceiling if something breaks their way. And then after that, I probably don't want another guy like that on my roster. I usually only want one like floor play at a certain position on my roster at receiver, at running back. Other than that, I'm going to go all upside. So I think Ayuk is an upside shot. I think Allen Lazard is an upside shot as well. I think Lazard is someone I'd be very interested in with this first pick. And yeah, I don't know. I'd be down to go Ayuk or Lazard with this pick and then try to snag Olave on the turn if he gets back to us. Maybe we go with that floor play wide receiver later because I think you can find them in the 9th, 10th round as well.
Yeah, and knowing how these drafts typically go, everyone's going to start to get their handcuff running backs. More quarterbacks and tight ends are going to go. So we may see a position where we can get multiple guys in this tier. Last name I want to throw out there, Alex, any consideration for Treylon Burks? I know he's getting kind of slandered from camp reports right now. He's like starting out as the 4th wide receiver on the depth chart. He's playing a significant snap share in a preseason game, which you kind of don't want to see from your stud receivers. Granted, Drake London was out there and he got hurt. Is there any consideration for Burks being that reincarnation of the A.J. Brown role in Tennessee?
Maybe around the turn. And even A.J. Brown's rookie year, about halfway through the season, he hadn't done much, and then he won people leagues with big plays week after week. But this pick is someone who will be starting in our lineup week 1. And I think Treylon Burks by week 7, even Justin Jefferson in his rookie year took a while to get going. Like, I think Treylon Burks by the back half of the year.
Jefferson broke out week 2.
Could be, well, he did, and then he relegated again, and then his full breakout wasn't until week 5 or 6. So even in that situation, you're waiting a little bit. So I want someone who we would feel comfortable starting week 1. I think Allen Lazard and Brandon Ayuk fit that bill. And then I think if we get around the turn and Treylon Burks is there, we smash on him for an upside play. So that's how I think about it. But again, I'll concede to you on this.
Let's go
first
Lazard.
Pick if you give me the second. And if I go ahead and get my Lazard pick here, I'll give you the pick at the 803.
Let's go Lazard at wide receiver 42. I've been smashing on him everywhere. I've dropped so many takes on Lazard. I've talked about him a ton. You and I are in on Lazard being a potential wide receiver 1. And if for whatever reason Green Bay has a great year, like we will see the rewards of that going Lazard here. And then we're like, wait, we got a wide receiver 2 in the back of the 7th round that's now a consistent starter. And I'm fine with Lazard as a flex in leagues where I'm addressing the other positions earlier on in the draft. So let's go Lazard. Let's see who makes it around the turn. After we went Lazard, thankfully, no other wide receivers went. So this is the part of these drafts where people are going to focus on their positions. They're going for their handcuffs. They're going for their tight ends. They're circling around on quarterbacks that might fall. And Alex, I'm actually
I like Ayuk.
I like Ayuk here as well, just for that upside. If you look at the injury history on Deebo Samuel, it's not exactly a shiny, clean injury report from him in the past. I know Deebo was a monster last year, but you and I both expect regression for the rushing touchdowns, for the rushing volume in general, and there's an injury risk with Deebo Samuel. Now, I know Kittle's there as well, but Ayuk can be that outside big play threat that Trey Lance can throw deep to. And if you watched any of the preseason game, I liked the few plays that we saw from Trey Lance through the air. I think he's like the antithesis to Jimmy G. He's not going to be your timing over the middle, short, quick passing game guy. Not at all. He's more of that Jalen Hurts, even Josh Allen to a degree, where he has rushing capabilities plus the big arm that he can make those throws to the outside that a Jimmy G just could not. So I'm going Ayuk. We are going Ayuk, I should say, in the 8th round. And hopefully there's another receiver that we like that makes it back.
Okay.
And still a couple interesting names. One that you threw out there earlier was Jacoby Myers. We'll circle back on the running backs as well. Maybe there's a value here or there. But after we went Ayuk, we saw some upside running backs that I like a lot if we weren't stuck into this roster build, which is Kareem Hunt, James Cook, Kenneth Walker went, Michael Carter went, Melvin Gordon, Ramondre Stevenson went, Dameon Pierce. The hype train is started for Dameon Pierce. I'm a big fan of his game. Talked about him a ton during rookie season. And then at the receiver spot, we saw Burks go. Unfortunately, we saw Olave go, Garrett Wilson go, Tyler Lockett, and that's about it. So still plenty of receivers in the range that we were considering. And then we saw some of the quarterbacks start to go off the board. Hurts went, Kyler went, Burrow went, Brady went, and then 3 tight ends. We're not considering tight end or QB here. So it's either, hey, do we like a Darrell Henderson? Do we like a James Robinson enough to risk it even more at the wide receiver spot?
I think we go back to the wide receiver well here. And I think it's interesting to say that the 2 floor play guys I mentioned last round were Woods and Myers. And in these high stakes ADP formulated drafts, those guys are on the board. That shows you what these high stakes players are going for. If you're not first, you might as well be last. And those aren't the guys that win you league. So I know I mentioned I typically like to have one of those receivers on my roster. But this shows instead of taking that guy in round 6 and Hunter Renfrow, wait until the double-digit rounds of your draft and grab a slot receiver in a PPR league that can just get you 10, 12 points if you're in a pinch. So those guys also, it's worth saying, you can find them on the waiver wire throughout the year. So, I think Woods, Myers certainly could end the year with good numbers. But the more I think about it, the more I kind of am just not interested in those guys. I mean, Claypool's on the board, but I don't know. I have a lot of question marks about him and that situation in Pittsburgh. Sky Moore, to me, is interesting. I know we already have Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes, but one of these receivers in Kansas City is going to emerge. It looks like it's going to be Juju Smith-Schuster based on what we've seen in camp. but one of these other guys could break out as we see the season play out. And we don't have a rookie wide receiver yet. I know we were thinking about Treylon Burks. We were thinking about Chris Olave. Sky Moore could be an interesting name as well. So to me, the pick would be Sky Moore. But Steph, I'm curious to kick it to you with the running backs. I just think we can wait a little bit longer. We have 3 stud running backs. We'll grab a couple handcuffs later on with some upside. But who are you liking at the receiver spot here? I know we've both been in on Jacoby Myers in best ball formats, but I just don't know if he's the kind of play that we need for this roster right now.
Yeah, this whole exercise that we're going through right now, where every pick is like, we want to take value, but we're stuck going receiver, I think is the takeaway from this draft. Because going with that early tight end and circling back on running back twice put us into a tough spot where we're going to be loaded at every position except for wide receiver 1. Right? And it keeps going back to, had we gone Evans, had we gone Keenan Allen, I probably wouldn't have gone Higgins in the early second. But I think a Keenan Allen, Mike Evans would have been completely fine. Or had we gone with a Sutton or Deontay instead of Zeke, I think we'd feel a lot better about this roster. So we'll take notes on this. We'll learn from it. I feel like Jacoby Myers is not only a safe play, but actually has a little bit of a ceiling because we expect positive regression in the touchdown category. Devontae Parker is really his main source of competition. He struggled to stay healthy. People have said he's looked washed over the last 2 seasons after that Fitz magic year where he went off. If it's not the rebirth for Devontae Parker to put wind back into the sails of his career, then Jacoby Myers is going to be an absolute target magnet in a New England offense that I know is run first. I know they like to play good defense, but we saw multiple times last year where Jacoby Myers had to step in and play a pivotal role. Last year, he had 126 targets, over 1,200 air yards. It was 16th in the NFL in receptions, with essentially 5 receptions per game. I know 11 fantasy points per game isn't great, but if he can improve on that a bit and just be a desperation flex play for us, if Lazard busters out, if Ayuk is struggling with Lance, if Sutton is the guy and Judy is nothing, at least we can plug in a Jacoby Myers into our flex spot and hope for the best. Okay, the catchable target rate last year was brutal. I expect that to go up with Mac Jones, hopefully taking a step up in year 2. And being a slot receiver means that Jacoby Myers is essentially starting every route with separation. So I think he can be a guy where, like we saw last year in games against New Orleans, 14 targets, Tampa Bay, 12 targets. Later on in the year against Indianapolis, 12 targets. And then if you look at other games, 8 targets, 8 targets, 8 targets, 6 targets, 9 targets, like he is just going to be a target hawk. We're not drafting him here to be a touchdown scoring machine. We're not expecting him to be a explosive playmaker. We're just expecting him to be a solid, consistent option. So I know I'm rambling a lot here. It's because I'm trying to justify this Jacoby Myers pick. And I think for our roster build, he's a fine selection. Unlike Tyler Boyd, who we would have to rely on a Higgins or Chase injury for him to be relevant.
Yeah, no, I'm cool with the pick. And after that went Stafford, Rashad White, Alexander Madison, and Dak Prescott. So we're back on the board, and we're finally at the point with 4 receivers now where I'm kind of willing to look at the running back position. I can't believe Robert Woods. Sky Moore is still there. That's who I would have picked last round. That could just be an easy smash play for us. But then at the running back spot, I do think there's some interesting names that we should look into. I think Darrell Henderson is interesting in LA. I think Kenneth Gainwell is interesting. And Isaiah Spiller stands out to me as well. If Rashad White would have made it through, that would have been someone I would have been willing to pick here. But for me, I think we can actually wait at the receiver spot. I still think this tier is really wide. Even names like, DJ Chark as we get down the board.
I knew you were going to say Chark.
A Nico Collins, a Jahan Dotson. Those names are all interesting with upside. So I think we can wait. A KJ Osborne I see down there as well is kind of interesting to me as someone who could step up even further this year. So I'd be cool taking one of these running backs, Steph, Isaiah Spiller, Kenneth Gainwell, or Darrell Henderson. And my guess is your preference between the 3 will be Gainwell just because of the hype train he's been getting in Philly. But I'm interested to hear your take on those 3. And are you with me kind of finally passing on receiver and getting back to a running back, which we haven't taken in 5 rounds.
Alex, I think we need to bite the bullet and take another receiver. Just because our receiver core right? is Judy, Lazard, Ayuk, Myers.
That's actually pretty bad, yeah.
Every single one of those names has at least one, if not multiple, red flags. Judy, we've never seen him produce with Sutton on the field. He's had injury. The resume is not great. Lazard, he's never done it before. Any wide receiver one or leading the Packers in receptions, all of that is a projection. He does not have a resume that we can fall back on like an Allen Robinson or even like a Christian Kirk or Devonta Smith. Brandon Ayuk saw great plays his rookie year, then gets in the doghouse to start last year, and then the Debo breakout caps him. Lance at QB, a lot of question marks. Jacoby Myers, it's New England. It's just tough to trust any receiver in that offense. I think we go either Sky Moore or Robert Woods. Now, the take for Robert Woods, I know he's 30 years old. I know he's coming off the ACL. Okay, but he made a quick ACL recovery. He's running routes in practice. Looks great. He was used as a gadget player in LA. Treylon Burks has some question marks. His value is getting massively depressed based on camp reports. He had that asthma to start the offseason, followed by what looks like a doghouse of some sort. Like, why is he playing so much of a preseason game? Why is he being listed as the wide receiver 4 or 5 on the depth chart? Maybe Woods is actually that guy, that target monster in Tennessee. Are you with me on that, or should we just go for the moonshot, go all in on Kansas City, and take Sky Moore, who looks like he could be in store for a gadget role?
I think I expressed earlier the upside for Sky Moore, but like I said last round, I think there's so much upside in players later, similar upside in a Nico Collins, in a Jahan Dotson, even a DJ Chark. Let's just take Robert Woods, get more stability on this roster. Still has question marks, but fewer question marks, probably less upside. But let's just lock that in, and then next time around, we can go for a more upside wide receiver, and then finally try to address the running back position. Again, the fact that Woods is here in round 10 is kind of crazy as is, so let's just lock it in.
Could be the Titans wide receiver 1. I mean,
should be, honestly, in terms of receptions and targets this season. So after Robert Woods, we did see some of those running backs go. I already see Isaiah Spiller, Rojo, Nyheim Hines, McKissick, and Darrell Henderson off the board. Finally seeing a run of quarterbacks as well, and a big run of tight ends. So not a single additional receiver came off the board in 18 picks. So we could turn right back around and go Sky Moore here. I think that might be an easy decision. And then next round, we might come back to a Kenneth Gainwell or one of these other running backs on the board. It looks like James Robinson, who I'm not really interested in, is on the board. Gainwell.
Let's talk about James Robinson, because when you were going through, Henderson, even talking about Ronald Jones, Isaiah Spiller, you didn't mention J-Rob. And as of right now, it looks like he's going to be ready by week 1. He's going to be on the field. He's running routes in camp. All systems go based on the reports for J-Rob, who was a RB1 the last 2 years on a fantasy points per game basis. I know ETN's healthy and back, and I love ETN more than probably most fantasy players. But what's holding you back from throwing J-Rob out there as a premier super late option? Because he has the handcuff appeal, and I think a little bit of standalone value, probably not enough that we'd love to plug him into our lineup week 1, but at least once we get into bye weeks, it gets ugly, we can plug him into our RB2 spot.
I don't know. I think last year, before ETN got hurt, people were already fading James Robinson into oblivion because ETN was a first-round pick. Now you get another new coaching staff that has nothing to do with James Robinson. He has no draft capital. I guess you could say this coaching staff didn't draft ETN either, but he's Trevor Lawrence's college running back. ETN is going to be the preferred running back here, has the draft capital, has the talent, has the ability. And so when it was just ETN and James Robinson, no, people probably weren't fading him to round 11, but he plummeted down draft boards. And that was before he tore his Achilles in December. And I wouldn't be surprised if he started on the pup. I know he's kind of been practicing, but that's still a long way to go from game speed. So, yes, maybe he's out there week 1, maybe he's involved halfway through the season, but in a best case scenario, he's in a below average Jacksonville offense as the number 2 between the tackles grinder. Maybe he's the guy on the goal line as well. So to me, I would rather take the shot on a Kenneth Gainwell, on an Isaiah Spiller, on a Darrell Henderson, someone with a more clear path to relevance than James Robinson. Not saying Robinson can't do it off the Achilles, just other guys in this tier I like more. Now, if Robinson fell 2 more rounds, I might be looking at him. But to me, when there's especially, some of the receiver names on the board as well, Claypool, Sky Moore, I'm just not going to take Robinson over those guys. I'm fine to be wrong on him for this season. I just don't want to draft someone who sits on my bench for the first 6 weeks of the year, or hopefully if you draft him, you have an IR spot just in case he does go on the pup to start the year.
So let's go Sky Moore. You've sold me enough to fade J-Rob. I'm hoping Gainwell gets back to us because I think he'd be a great RP4 for this build. Interesting to see the fall from grace from Chase Claypool. We'll talk about that in a moment, but let's make the Sky Moore pick. And wow, three tight ends and QBs, Justin Fields. Man. Claypool is still there. Do we dare say Claypool with a better QB than Big Ben last year, at least for his role? I know Pickens is terrifying for Chase Claypool's career outlook, but do we go with the vet over the rookie, or do we stick to the plan and go Gainwell?
This is hard. It's tough. I don't believe in Claypool this year, but in round 12, it's hard not to. There's a world where we know he can score touchdowns. We know he's a deep ball threat, and Mitch Trubisky is going to be able to air the ball out down the field. That's why Claypool, I think, suffered last year, is because Big Ben was checking it down. He was throwing underneath to Deontay Johnson. Now you get a quarterback, whether it's Pickett or Mitch Trubisky, I think they'll be better at pushing the ball down the field. No, Claypool's not going to be consistent, but in the right matchups with the right volume from this offense, I think he can have good weeks, and you can play him strategically in your flex. So I think we just go for it. I mean, at this point, we're in round 12. What is there to lose? We're not going to find these values as we move throughout the draft. And I still think we can find running back handcuffs that probably have similar outlooks to Gainwell later on. Guys like Brian Robinson could be on the board. Tyler Algier, Jamal Williams should get a lot of run. Khalil Herbert we saw him get 20-plus touches and be very efficient when David Montgomery went down. So I think we go Claypool, take another shot at the receiver spot. Someone who has done it before, still has question marks, but we've seen it. Just load up on receivers so we can see what plays out through the first couple weeks of the season, and we can circle back to running back later on, because we're not going to need to start these running backs with the 3 studs that we have on our roster, hopefully ever. And then hopefully as the season plays out, we see some of these rookies or these handcuffs get some run and get some accrued value.
And what do we talk about all the time in Dynasty? It's that every year there's veteran wide receivers that everyone hates that end up going off. Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel were round 8, and Mike Williams were round 8, 9, sometimes even 10 redraft picks last year. Chase Claypool, as a rookie, over 1,400 air yards, 9 touchdowns, over 100 targets, and then in year 2 in an anemic offense in 15 games, over 100 targets, over 850 receiving yards both years, 1,200 air yards. I know the 2 touchdowns is gross. I know he was a wide receiver 3. But Claypool's still here, and you and I are both out on Claypool. But he actually may be the number 1 value in drafts right now because everyone's out on him. And we haven't seen anything other than, okay, he has some maturity issues. Yes, they took Pickens, but Claypool's not nothing. He's been part of this offense for 2 years, and he was very, very solid as a rookie. Again, I'm not saying I'm in on Claypool, but it's interesting that he's now become an extreme value. We just got him in the 12th round. And after we took Claypool, unfortunately, we did see our boy Gainwell get picked.
He almost made it back.
2 picks before us, got absolutely sniped because we believe that Gainwell, correct me if I'm wrong here, Alex, I think he's going to be the RB1 in Philly. I don't think it's Miles Sanders anymore.
It's weird because you used to be so high on Miles Sanders and I was out. And now I'm like, I think Sanders probably is a good value, but I think it could be close to a 1-2 split. So if you're getting Gainwell in the 13th rounds, 6, 7 rounds after Miles Sanders, I definitely think that's worth it. So love that Gainwell pick. Unfortunately, didn't fall to us. But there is one guy, Steph, at the running back spot that sticks out to me. And some people might try to say he doesn't have upside. Maybe you'll say that as well. But I'm kind of coming around on Jamal Williams a little bit. I mean, we saw this guy be effective in his time in Green Bay. Even in Detroit last season, we saw him have some really good games. I mean, in week 1 last year, he had 8 receptions for 56 yards, scored a touchdown on the ground. He had multiple weeks of double-digit carries. When DeAndre Swift was out, we saw Jamal Williams get a pretty healthy workload. We love the Lions' offensive line. We think the offense could actually be above average this season. And I'm now seeing reports out of camp that Jamal Williams is getting a lot of first-team work. And yes, he could end up getting the Hard Knocks bump. It looks like Dan Campbell absolutely loves Jamal Williams and even telling him, telling reporters and things, Jamal Williams doesn't have to prove anything to me. Like, he's secure. His role is secure. Don't need to see anything else from him. I know what he's bringing to the table. And we've seen this Swift Jamal Williams be this 1A, 1B situation similar to a Javonte, Melvin Gordon type split where Jamal Williams can bring value to the table both as a runner and a receiver. So I think he is someone that actually gives you standalone value at the running back spot. And he also does have upside if Swift misses time. So I actually have been liking Jamal Williams late in drafts as one of these even Kareem Hunt style handcuffs where he does have standalone value, but also has the ceiling, probably not as high of a ceiling as a Kareem Hunt, as a Tony Pollard, as an Alexander Madison, but a little bit of an elevated ceiling if Swift misses any time.
If you remember last year, and I don't agree on the Jamal Williams pick, but I like your take. And you made me think of last year where, as a Swift investor, heavy Swift investor, we would see Jamal Williams start the game for the first 30% of snaps. And you're like, where the heck is Swift? Swift hasn't gotten a touch. And we're halfway through the second quarter because Jamal Williams is soaking up targets. He's soaking up carries. Last year in week 1, 25 fantasy points, had a touchdown in that game, but caught 8 of his 9 targets. And then in other games, we saw 5 for 5 against Chicago through the air, and 3 for 3. It's very reasonable.
In his last
3 receptions a game.
His last 5 active games last year, he averaged 15 carries and 2 targets per game. So
with
some with Swift, some without. 2 of those 5 games Swift was healthy, and Jamal Williams still saw double-digit carries. So I don't know. That's who my pick would be. Steph, sounds like you are not in agreement. I'm curious to hear who your selection would be here in the 13th round. We're running out of picks here. I think we might only have 1 or 2 more bench spots to select. So who would you go with? We're not loaded at wide receiver, but we have a ton of volume at that position is what I would say.
We're definitely not loaded at receiver, but they got another Lion that you and I both like, and TJ Chark, to start the year off hot. We can drop him once if Jameson Williams comes back and is that dude, and Chark is relegated to nothing, which I don't see happening, to at least relegated to nothing. He might get relegated to the 3rd or 4th option in the passing game, fine. But I don't see him being relegated to an absolute 0. He might be more of that.
He's been balling out in camp. He's been apparently crushing it in camp. So
you and I both believe Chark is good. Mm-hmm. He has that AJ Green prototype. We saw him have monster years in Jacksonville. Now, I say monster year, wide receiver 17, the year with Gardner Minshew, and then some injuries, the Urban Meyer. It's been kind of gross over the last 2 years, but Chark is another guy like Claypool where we've seen him have big plays. We've seen him do it. I'll split the difference, Alex. Why don't you say we go Chark here and Jamal Williams?
Lions, 2 Lions if we can.
Lions stack.
Let's go.
What do you know? He's there. Make it easy for us. We both get our guy. And we've talked about this every single time in these drafts. Make sure you check before you start your draft. Do you have to draft a kicker and a defense, especially in these early drafts that are happening over the next couple weeks, where we're weeks away from week 1 kickoff? Injuries are going to happen in camp. We saw it with ETN last year. We saw it with Dobbins last year. We saw it with Akers last year. Things happen in camp. Things happen in preseason games. So load up on these deeper positions that by the start of the year, you end up with an extra starter that you got essentially for free in the 15th, 16th round. Let's assume that we don't need to draft kicker or defense because I really don't want to get into kicker takes on today's episode. James Robinson is there. We've talked about him a ton. We both like Tyler Algier as a prospect. Didn't get the draft capital that we wanted, but it seems like he will be that between the tackles grinder in Atlanta, and we did see him put up receiving numbers in college. Who's the pick here between J-Rob and Algier? I think Algier probably has the most upside to start the year, where J-Rob has that handcuff.
See, this is actually an example where I'd love to take J-Rob here, especially if you have an IR spot because you don't have a kicker on your roster. So you take J-Rob. If J-Rob doesn't start on the pup, great. You got a crazy value on him, and he's healthy for week 1. If he does, move him to IR and pick up your kicker. So that's actually a perfect pivot to take J-Rob here late in this draft. So I think we lock that in. And I also, Steph, I do want to take a defense here because I want to illustrate the importance of looking at defensive matchups to start the season. Rams D is going to be a great defense this year. Well, guess what? They play the Buffalo Bills week 1. Are you going to start the Rams against Buffalo? Maybe you do, and you hope for the best.
No.
But I would much rather have the Denver Broncos defense against the Seattle Seahawks on Monday Night Football and Geno Smith or Drew Lock and that stacked Broncos D. So look at these matchups because you don't want to draft a high-profile defense that you either A, don't start week 1 and you have to pick up a second defense for the first week of the season, or B, you end up dropping them anyway. So unfortunately, Broncos D is gone. But the other defense that I love for a week 1 matchup is actually the Indianapolis Colts. The Indianapolis Colts play the Houston Texans. You and I both love Money Mills, but the great thing about the Colts is they have the Texans week 1 and Jacksonville in week 2. So you can start out the year with the Colts D, who have a pretty good unit as it is and a lot of talent, and you get 2 streaming weeks right off the bat in great matchups. So look at those things in your draft. I think Broncos and Colts are the 2 premium options for me, but there's some other really good options as well. In week 1, I mean, the Browns and the Panthers play each other. So either of those defenses I think would be fine. Probably the Browns would be a pretty good pick if you don't think Baker is going to come light them up week 1. But that's important to look at because you don't want to get stuck with 2 defenses on your roster or just wasting a pick with the defense with, honestly, a really tough matchup. I mean, the Ravens against the Jets is another good one. So there's good options this year, more than in years past, but just be sure to look at that before you draft.
Great call out, and I'm smashing on Colts D in every single redraft league where I have to draft a defense. But Alex, let's talk about Tyler Algier for a minute because he I think I speak for both of us when he is the pick here if we don't go with a defense or kicker, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And why do we like Algier? Well, I know he was a 5th-round pick, and that stinks, but a lot of other boxes he checks. Not the most athletic guy in the world. We have seen that be a detriment to running backs, but more so in Dynasty than in redraft. We've seen guys like James Conner, Zach Moss, Kareem Hunt that aren't running 4.4s. These guys are running late 4.5s. David Montgomery's also in this range. Tyler Algier ran a 4.6. So, look, we would love to see more burst on an Algier, but at 5'11", 221 pounds, he has good size. We saw him get over an 8% target share in college, which is what you want to see in the NFL for NFL players. So 10% target share his senior year. Had over 1,600 rushing yards as a senior, 23 touchdowns, 39 targets, caught 28 of them for 199 receiving yards as well at age 21 at BYU. There's a lot to like about Algier, and he's in a running back room with next to no competition. It's Cordarrelle Patterson, who they're probably going to play out at the receiver role, especially if Drake London's injury happens to be more severe than we think, or God forbid one of him or Pitts gets injured during the season. They're going to rely on Cordarrelle Patterson in the passing game, which I think opens up Algier to be more of the between the tackles grinder for Atlanta. And again, he can carry out of the backfield as well. Look at Mike Davis last year for a projection on Tyler Algier.
Yeah, I think Algier's a great pick here at the running back spot. I think some of the receivers are interesting as well. Like Julio Jones, if he's there in your last round, maybe you take a flyer on him. I think Nico Collins is a very interesting receiver. Pickens, we both do love Pickens. Guys like Josh Palmer, KJ Osborne, all guys you can take shots on, but also could just be priority waiver pickups if we see if they do anything in the first couple weeks of the season. So I think Algier is that premium name because to me, he has the best shot to be one of those hot waiver wire pickups after week 1. And that's what these last picks of your draft are really about, is just trying to get ahead of that week 1 waiver rush and find guys who you can either drop after the first game, or you realize, hey, I have a really good stash that might actually be valuable.
One thing I wanted to check before we actually pulled the trigger on Algier, do we take the shot on Pacheco?
No.
On camp hero Isaiah Pacheco, you are out on him. And I wanted to hear some takes on Pacheco, because his college resume is suspect, but his size and speed is off the charts, and he's in Kansas City. Is this just another Clyde Edwards-Helaire where, look, he's on the Chiefs, so he's going to skyrocket up draft boards?
He screams like, I hate to say it, because I would love it if he came out and he was just amazing for fantasy and for the Chiefs. But to me, 7th round Isaiah Pacheco in a crowded Kansas City backfield just screams utility player who is like Kene Nwangwu from last year. Ooh. Got a great camp, had some maybe he returns kicks, maybe he gets involved in unique ways and has some breakaway plays. Like, I think Nwangwu was like an all-pro on special teams last year, but I don't think he is going to make a fantasy impact when you still have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. At the time of this recording, Ronald Jones is on that roster. They brought back Jarrett McKinnon. Darren Gore is still there. So I think it's to see Pacheco have a big enough role to where you ever feel comfortable starting him every single week outside of like a dart throw DFS play. At this point is a long shot. It could happen. Maybe it evolves throughout the season, but he's someone I'm going to see what the snaps look like, see what the carries look like. Maybe I spend some fab on him if he starts to get involved and starts to ramp up. But I'm not willing to take him over guys that are still on the board here with this last pick.
And we've talked about other rookies that are values at this point. Brian Robinson, Tyrion.
I do like Brian Robinson a lot as well.
Yeah, he's one that, man, B-Rob or Algier? Who's your pick? Because that's tough.
Well, in a lot of drafts, Algier's been going 3-4 rounds ahead of Brian Robinson. So at cost, I've found myself drafting a ton of Brian Robinson in best ball just because sometimes you can get him in like your last round or second to last round. His ADP is skyrocketing a little bit with some of the recent news with Antonio Gibson and things like that. But I do prefer Algier in a vacuum just because I think he has the clearest path to more touches, more of a role in the offense. Brian Robinson is probably 2 injuries away from being a fantasy game breaker with McKissick and Antonio Gibson. So for that reason, I'll take the shot on Algier.
Well, Alex, let's answer the question. Does 0 wide receiver work? Granted, I know we went with a ton of wide receivers later. I'm not a fan really of this roster. There is some upside on here. There's some upside on
this
here.
This is a team that I think could win a championship, but it takes work throughout the season to do it. I mean, you can't win your league at the draft, but you a lot of times can lose your league at the draft. This roster does not lose our league. We have tons of upside. Our running backs are rock solid with upside. We kind of took the spray approach at wide receiver. We need to hit on a waiver wire pickup. We need one of these late round dart throws to hit and maybe do some 2-for-1 trades to get an upside receiver in the Brandon Cooks range, in even like the Hollywood Brown range, maybe a Terry McLaurin range to make this roster really feel complete. I don't love it, but it's definitely not the worst roster I've ever seen or that I've ever drafted in a mock draft. Let me just tell you that.
Well, look, I'd love to hear from everybody in the comments down below. If you're still rocking with us, first off, like and a sub, greatly appreciate it. But we appreciate you watching and sticking around as we're experimenting with these mock drafts this season. If you want to keep rocking with us, hit that free Discord link in the description down below. Hope you enjoyed the takes. Let us know if this is the worst roster you've ever seen, or if you think it does have that winning upside with that Mahomes-Kelsey stack, with Zeke, Dalvin Cook, Brees at the top end of our RB spot with some rookies and depth pieces filling out the rest of the roster. And then we just took big play guys that have shown flashes and Jerry Jeudy. That's pretty much our whole maybe Jacoby Myers for the floor play, and that's about it. Hate our receivers. Definitely would not have taken Kelsey there in hindsight, would not have taken Mahomes there in hindsight and gone with better receivers. But we went into this saying, hey, let's try to go robust RB. Kelsey seemed like a value. And so we put ourselves into this tough spot. So, look, we'll take our L if we have to take it. But, Alex, that was an absolute blast to go through the exercise and see what would happen. But we'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
Peace.